Hello, everyone. Thanks for clicking and thanks for watching. We're going to get into some really fantastic stuff today. Very applicable to ex-Mormons, very poetic, and just a section of this amazing book, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, that really speaks to me personally. And hopefully I can convey that to you, the way that it speaks to me. It speaks very applicably to my journey out of Mormonism, and it's very beautiful too, as you'll find. I think it's funny, like when Mormon apostles and prophets talk about how the Book of Mormon is the most inspired book, the most inspiring book on the planet, and there's nothing that even comes close. I just kind of laugh these days. I'm a philosophy major, and I just have read so many more books that are so much more inspiring. This being one of them, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, but just a lot of others too that are way more inspiring than the Book of Mormon. And just so when I hear things like that, when I hear members of the church say that, I just kind of think it's funny. But I guess that's kind of a side note. But this is a really great section, and essentially with Thus Spoke Zarathustra, the premise is this guy, Zarathustra, he's a prophet of sorts. And he descends from his mountain down into the valleys, down into the towns, and he gives knowledge to the common folk, the town folk. And the main thing that he talks about is how God is dead, but that's okay. It's okay that God's dead. And essentially, you can ascend to heights and you can become your own God, your own prophet, and you can be the person that puts your own fate into your hand and moves your life forward. And I think it's a really empowering, really inspiring ideology or philosophy. At least it is for me. You know, there's an interesting quote that I heard, and so I would say because so the quote basically is, in Christianity, your salvation rests on someone else. With Eastern religions, your salvation rests within you. And now Nietzsche obviously is a Western philosopher, but I do think I would say the same sort of thing with him as I would with comparing it to Eastern philosophy in that way, if that makes sense. His whole philosophy is talking about how you can be the person that saves yourself, essentially. And I think that's so empowering to especially ex-Mormons that have come from a dogma where they teach you that if you don't, like, you guys know how it is. If you don't do X, Y, and Z, and then not just X, Y, and Z, but A, B, C, the whole alphabet, and then X, Y, and Z, you're not going to be saved. And with something like Nietzsche, with a philosophy like Nietzsche, just getting beyond that dichotomy. And funny enough, one of his books is called Beyond Good and Evil, which is the sister book to this, to Thus Spoke Zarathustra. And that's kind of his whole point. Like, let's get beyond the dogma. Let's get beyond these old ways of thinking about good and evil and right and wrong and God. And let's actually talk about something substantive. And so that's kind of what this is about. But without further ado, I think I've rambled enough. Let's actually get into it. Oops. So I'm going to just read and then I'm going to discuss. So Zarathustra's eyes had discerned that a young man avoided him. As he walked one evening alone through the mountains surrounding the town, which is called the Motley Cow, behold, there while walking, he found this young man leaning against a tree, gazing wearily into the valley. Zarathustra grasped the tree at which the young man sat and spoke thus. If I wanted to shake this tree here with my hands, I would not be able to. But the wind that we do not see torments and bends it wherever it wants. We are bended and tormented worse by invisible hands. Then the young man stood up perplexed and said, I hear Zarathustra, and I was just thinking about him. Zarathustra responded, Why are you startled by this? But it is with human beings, as it is with this tree. The more they aspire to heights and the light, the more strongly their roots strive earthward, downward, into darkness, depths, into evil. I mean, just that last paragraph, right? I mean, I love that imagery. Like if you want to become the tallest tree or just a tall tree, your roots are going to have to go down to hell. They're going to have to go down really, really far. And because if you don't have strong roots, you're in trouble as a big tree. You're going to just blow over. So these tall trees, these really strong trees, their roots are descending in way far into the earth. And he likens that to humans, obviously. And so I think like the way that I'd apply this to leaving the church in a way is I think when you leave your roots when you leave and you get outside of the metaphorical Garden of Eden and you start getting beyond that first layer of soil in a way. And I would consider, I mean, I don't like I'm not here to like trash LDS people, but this is just how I feel. Like I think that when I was LDS, and I can only speak for myself personally, it was a very surface layer understanding of the world and of good and evil and of just a lot of things, morality even. And that's not to say that you can't be a good person and be Mormon, obviously. That's totally not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that when you leave, I think that you have to, in order to be a good person, you have to really find a reason to do so. Um, because that's how it was for me at least. Because when I left the church, I kind of went into this like nihilistic phase essentially, where I really questioned. I think a lot of people do. I think that's pretty common with a lot of people. But I started questioning why any of this, why I needed to even do any of these societal games or dances that we all participate in. And thankfully now I feel like I've been able to ground myself a lot better, but that's only by my roots extending earthward, as Nietzsche talks about here. I've had to really look for answers. I haven't, you can't just be spoon-fed answers when you leave Eden, right? You have to actually do work. You have to actually do something that will give you answers, and they're not just going to fall in your lap. Let's continue. Yes, into evil, cried the young man. How is it possible that you discovered my soul? Zarathustra smiled and said, some souls will never be discovered unless they are first invented. Yes, into evil, cried the young man again. You speak the truth, Zarathustra. I no longer trust myself since aspiring to the heights, and no one trusts me any more. How did this happen? I'm changing too fast. My today contradicts my yesterday. I often skip steps when I climb. No step forgives me that. If I am at the top, then I always find myself alone. No one speaks with me. The frost of loneliness makes me shiver. What do I want in the heights? How ashamed I am of my climbing and stumbling. How I mock my violent panting. How I hate the flying one. How weary I am in the heights. And that just kind of continues with what I was saying for me. Like, there's a lot of, so this kid and Nietzsche are making this comparison between like ascending to the heights as they did with the tree, and now the kid is talking about climbing to the top of a mountain, right? And he's saying like as I've been trying to climb to the top of this mountain, it hasn't been easy. I've been stumbling, I've been falling. I'm alone, I feel lonely. I'm cold. Nothing about this is easy. It's mentally hard. And yeah, I think for me, like, totally relate. And I think that, especially the part where he talks about like feeling alone when he's on the top. And keep in mind, like when I say on the top, I'm not talking about like being in a position where you're superior to other people necessarily. I'm not saying that once you reach the top that you're like just this amazing person, but there is something to the person that tries to reach the top, and doesn't just stay where it's safe at the base of the mountain, but actually puts on a backpack and starts hiking and stumbles and falls and trips up. You know, there's something courageous about that. There's something admirable about that. And because you're going, you're ascending, you're doing something that's just not easy. And I think anytime somebody does something that's not easy, you know, I respect it. And for me, leaving the church, that it's probably one of the hardest things I've ever done. And you know, funnily enough, the things that the kid, like I said, when the kid talks about being alone, feeling lonely, yeah, I think everybody feels that way. Thankfully, there is a community of people that have left the church, but there is still that loneliness there for a lot of people, I would say, myself included. And when you're trying to do what's right, at least to the best of your knowledge, when you're attempting to do something that you feel is the right thing to do, oftentimes leaving that comfort zone isn't going to be an easy thing. All right, let's continue. Here the young man fell silent, and Zarathustra regarded the tree at which they stood and spoke thus: "This tree stands here lonely on the mountain. It grew high beyond humans and animals, and if it wanted to speak, it would have no one who understood it. So high it grew. Now it waits and waits, but for what does it wait? It lives too near the clouds' abode. It waits for the first lightning bolt." When Zarathustra had said this, the young man cried out, gesturing agitatedly, "Yes, Zarathustra, you speak the truth. I longed for my destruction when I aspired to the heights, and you were the lightning for which I waited. Look, what am I any more, now that you have appeared among us? It is my envy of you that has destroyed me." Thus spoke the young man, and he wept bitterly. But Zarathustra put his arm around him and led him away. Yeah, so when he talks about when the tree has reached such a high point where it's above all the other trees, there's nothing around for it to communicate with, essentially. It's kind of a funny it's funny imagery, right? It's like the Ents in Lord of the Rings. There's no other trees for it to talk to. um but yeah, I think when you get to that point where you're just different than other people, right? You've evolved, at least to the best of your knowledge. And I'd agree with you. When you leave the church, I think you have evolved to a certain extent, and a lot of people just aren't going to understand you. And you're going to look around, and there's going to be people who think very differently from you. And what Nietzsche is saying here is, oh, that's a good thing. That just means that you're ascending the heights, you're climbing the mountain, you're growing taller, your roots are going down further, and that's a good thing. That's what you want because it means that you're progressing. I think that there are problems. Like I don't think that just because like people don't understand you doesn't necessarily mean that you're going in the right direction. But I dare say that when you leave the church, that's what it means. And there's a lot of other reasons that we can get into for that with that, but there's something to that, especially when you live in Utah, which I do currently, and I'm sure a lot of you do too. Um, yeah. So he talks about how the tree that has ascended, it's waiting for something. It's waiting for a lightning bolt to come down and strike it and hit it and give it something, give it a jolt of life, right? And the young man says, "Yeah, and Zarathustra, you were the lightning bolt which I'm waiting for. And now you're here." And and so what I find interesting about that is that there's there is and Nietzsche is going to get into this later, but there is no lightning bolt for you to wait for. Okay, but I think that I'm going to save talking about that. Let's continue here. Let me just double check and make sure there's nothing else for me to say. Yeah. And after they had walked together for a while, Zarathustra started speaking thus: It tears my heart apart, better than your words can say. Your eyes tell me all your danger. You are still not free. You seek freedom. Your seeking made you sleep deprived and over awake. You aspire to the free heights. Your soul thirsts for the stars, but your wicked instincts also thirst for freedom. Your wild dogs want to get free. They bark with joy in their cellar when your spirit contrives to liberate all prisons. To me, you are still a prisoner who plots his freedom. Alas, the soul of such prisoners grows clever, but also deceptive and rotten. The one who is free of spirit must still purify himself. Much prison and mold is left in him. His eyes must still become pure. Yes, I know your danger, but by my love and hope, I beseech you, do not throw away your love and hope. You still feel noble, and the others who grudge you and give you the evil eye, they still feel your nobility too. Know that a noble person stands in everyone's way. Man, there's a lot there. Um, so number one, he says so that he I think so Nietzsche or sorry Zarathustra is recognizing that the boy is making some sort of ascent. He's ascending the mountain as they talked about earlier, and and the boy feels like he's on the top of the mountain as he talked about. But Nietzsche's saying just because you're on the top of the mountain and you're starting to be able to see more clearly doesn't mean that you're free. You're not free just because you've reached the top. Um, but yeah, like he says, your seeking made you sleep deprived and over awake. So and then he says, you aspire to the free heights, your soul thirsts for the stars, but your wicked instincts also thirst for freedom. So I think he's talking about how once you've ascended to the peak, once you've reached those heights, um, that's when everything starts. That's when once you can see clearly, that's when it all starts. There's not some once you can see clearly, it's not like all of a sudden you just are done wanting and you're just happy, right? That's when all the work begins. He talks about you're still reaching for the stars. You're trying to grasp at things which you have no comprehension of, you have no ability to do. So figure that out. Why are you grasping for the stars? What are the stars to you? And figure out how if that is first off, figure out if that even is something that you want. Figure out what you actually care about and figure out if you actually want to grasp the stars. And if grasping the stars is actually what you want to do, then great. Go do it and figure out a way to do it. But don't think that just because you've ascended the top that your work is done. No, this is when the work is beginning. And so that's what I'd say to people that are leaving the church too. And I think everybody would probably agree with that. It's like there's this is where your story actually starts. This is when you can start opening it up and living your life and figuring out your values. That's the most important thing. Figuring out your values is huge. You know, there are no ready-made values once you've reached the top of the mountain. The Ubermensch that Nietzsche talks about, the person that's transcended everything and can perfectly discern, not perfectly, but can discern good and evil without the need of a god. That doesn't come automatically. You don't become the Ubermensch. You don't become the Overman or woman just by climbing to the mountain, right? And then so he also says, this is interesting. So when he says, "But by my love and hope I beseech you, do not throw away your love and hope." I think I think what he's talking about is that because the boy that he's talking to has gotten to the top in some way, or he's on his way there, he's almost there, and he's really discouraged because he is starting to see things clearly. And once you start seeing things clearly, for me personally, I can absolutely, you know, I was just about to say I can absolutely testify about what I'm about to say, but sure, why not? Let's do it. Well, I can absolutely testify that what I'm about to say is true, but once you can see things clearly, it can get really depressing. Because for me, I like I said, I fell into nihilism, and nihilism's no way to go about your life. It's not. Now, a lot of people will say, yeah, but it's just objectively true. Well, yeah, to some extent, there's a lot of truth to nihilism. And cosmologically, as an atheist, yeah, I would say, yes, there is no divine or cosmological thing that is going to direct you. Yeah, there's no meaning, there's no objective meaning, but that doesn't mean that there's no meaning to things. And so I think that's what Nietzsche is going to talk about in the next reading that we're gonna do here in the next slide. But yeah, so basically, it can get really depressing once you're starting to see things clearly. Now, there's a lot of on the opposite side of that. It's also really liberating. It's liberating to be on the top of the mountain. You smell the fresh air. You feel a great breeze. There's a lot of positives, but the negatives are, you can actually see things now, and things aren't as good as you wanted them to be, and you're alone, like they talked about a couple slides ago. And it's a tough. You're tired. You're weary. It was tough to get there. So it's not all sunshine and rainbows, but it's absolutely worth it because you would rather see things clearly, and you would rather be on the top of this mountain or the tallest tree so that you can actually see than not. Because by not seeing, you're not you're not experiencing the world as it really is. And then this last part, you still feel noble, and the others who grudge you and give you the evil eye, they still feel your nobility too. Know that a noble person stands in everyone's way. And so this to me speaks to, like, so if you when you're out of the church and people like look at you weird for it or think less of you for it, which happens as we all know. It said, like, when he says they still feel your nobility, I think that's true to a large extent. I think there are a lot of people who think of you as some, like, when they see somebody that is so steadfast in a belief that is the exact opposite of what they believe, it kind of scares them, and they feel like, I don't know if nobility would be the right word in that context, but I don't know. They're afraid, and they're like, man, there's a guy out here that probably believes that the church is, or a guy or a girl that believes that the church is total BS, just as strongly. It looks, from what I can tell, just as strongly as I feel that the church is true. And I think that scares a lot of people. Now, don't get me wrong. There's obviously a lot of people that are still in the church that don't think that at all, and that are just um, totally bought in no matter what, and that doesn't make them even think for a second. There is a lot of that too, probably the majority, but there definitely are people that are scared by people that are like ascending their own path, ascending their own mountain in a different way, and not staying where they feel comfortable. So, all right. Then he goes on to say, a noble person also stands in the way of the good, and even when they call him a good man, they do so in order to get rid of him. The noble person wants to create new things and a new virtue. The good person wants old things, and for old things to be preserved. But it is not the danger of the noble one that he will become a good person, but a churl, a mocker, an annihilator. Now let me just stop there. So that he makes this distinction, and this can get a little confusing, but he makes this distinction between the noble person and the good person. Now, the good person is the person, so like he says in the very first stanza there, the good person. Oh, sorry, no, he doesn't talk about the good person, but he says the noble person is the person who wants to create new things and new virtues, and then the good person um, is the person that would be the opposite, and that would want to keep the old ways of morality and keep the old ways, kind of stay at the base of the mountain instead of ascend, right? Keep the old things, keep things the way that they always have been, and we don't really need anything else besides what we have. So that's the good person, and then the noble person is the one that wants to climb the mountain. Okay, so that's important to know. There's a big difference between the two there. And so he says, yeah, okay, yeah, there it is. The good person wants old things and for old things to be preserved. But it is not the danger of the noble one that he will become a good person. So what Nietzsche is saying is, I'm not worried in our context, I'm not worried about you joining the church again or going back into Mormonism. I'm worried that you become a churl, a mocker, an annihilator. And man, I think that there's a lot of really good insights that we can all take from that to an extent. And I think that when someone leaves the church, there absolutely is a lot to be upset about. Obviously, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of hurt, there's a lot of unfairness associated with that. But the anger phase when you leave the church, it's a phase for a reason. Eventually, you got to move on from that, and you have to, like, Mormonism shouldn't be something that holds you back in any way, shape, or form. And I think when you let it occupy a place in your mind where you're constantly upset about it, that it can hold you back. And don't get me wrong. Do not get me wrong. First off, everybody's experience is different. Some people go through way worse things than I ever have as a result of the church. Okay? I understand that. And everybody heals at their own pace. That's all valid and that's all true. But at some point, you gotta, there's healing that needs to be done, and do that and heal. And once you're healed to a sufficient extent, no matter how long that takes, it's going to be different for everyone. But once you feel like you're healed to a sufficient extent, try and move past the mocking, the annihilating, as he describes here. Try and move beyond that. You know, that's not what your or my, I don't think that that's what we should be focusing on at a certain point. Again, there's a time and a place, but at us after a certain point, I think you move on to greener pastures, you know. Um, yeah, and let's see. I feel like there was another point that I wanted to make with that. Yeah, I don't know. So I'll continue. Oh, I know noble people who lost their highest hope, and then they slandered all high hopes. Then they lived churlishly in brief pleasures, scarcely casting their goals beyond the day. Spirit is lust too, so they spoke. Then the wings of their spirit broke, and now it crawls around and soils what it gnaws. Once they thought of becoming heroes, now they are libertines. To them the hero is grief and ghastliness. So I think, yeah, he's talking about the people that uh, make it to the top, see things as they really are, and then say, "Why should I reach for anything higher than this? Why should I reach for the stars? Why should I not try and grab that lightning bolt? Or why should I try and, excuse me, why should I reach for the stars? Why should I try and grab that lightning bolt? Why should I do anything else? It's all baloney." And that's what nihilism, not cause the problem with philosophy is not, these terms mean so many different things in different contexts. But what I'll say is the nihilism that says I shouldn't do anything ever and it's all just bullshit and I shouldn't try, that's actually bullshit. That's not any way to live life. And just because there's not some universal meaning to life doesn't mean that there's no meaning. And that's a point that I made earlier. And so don't fall into that trap you feel that where you feel that nihilism strongly. And actually, let me take that back, because you can feel that nihilism strongly, and I certainly have, and I, to a certain extent, honestly, I still do. But you have to work. If you're not fighting to get beyond that, and you're not reaching for those stars. And I'm using, by the way, when I say reaching for the stars, I know that's a silly cliche. I'm not trying to. I should use a different term, because it is a. I actually hate that. That it's because it's a cliche, right? When I'm saying reaching for the stars, all I'm meaning is trying to trying to find a meaning, a subjective meaning in your life. What do you care about? Why do you care about it? Figure that out and go out and do it. Okay? That's what life is about. You find out what you care about. And if you don't think that you care about anything, you haven't I don't think you've looked hard enough. So when I'm that's what I mean when I say reaching for the stars. I'm going to stop using that term. But yeah, um and then when he says, yeah, just saying that I'm not gonna pursue, like, to make this even more applicable, like, I'm not gonna do hobbies, I'm not gonna do anything, I'm just gonna give up, and I'm gonna become a cog in a machine and go to my 9 to 5 and just quit, because who cares? There's no meaning, there's no purpose. That's what Nietzsche's fighting against. And it's ironic, because a lot of people think Nietzsche is a nihilist, and he is to a certain extent. Again, he's a cosmological nihilist. He doesn't believe that there's any absolute moral. There's no absolute cosmological truth. That's true. That doesn't mean that life is meaningless, though. Okay, and that's what Nietzsche believes, and I agree with him. Um, yeah. So then it goes on and it ends. This is such a badass line. But then he says, by my love and hope, I beseech you, do not throw away the hero in your soul. Hold holy your highest hope. Thus spoke Zarathustra. Yeah, I love that. It's fantastic. It's good stuff. Yeah, there's a hero in everybody. There's a hero in you. You just have to find it. And I think all of us are on that journey as we've, moved out of the church. I think that's a really good start. And maybe honestly, there's probably a lot of people, there's probably maybe some of you that are watching, maybe you have found the hero within yourself. And that's great. And I'm trying to be like you. And we all should try and be like you. But maybe you feel like you haven't done that yet. And I definitely haven't. That's fine too. We're all, just whatever you do, just don't throw that goal. Don't throw meaning and purpose away just because you've left the church. That couldn't be further from the truth. As we talked about, when you reach the top of that mountain and you can see things for how they really are, as dreadful as it can be, as disgusting and even scary as it can be, now that just shows that you're on the right path. That just shows that you're actually starting to see reality, and you're not being blinded by dogmas and by people that are holding you back. And you're not just at the base of the mountain looking at the clouds. No, you're above the clouds, and you're looking down on the town and on and just seeing things objectively. That's the best place. That's the most beautiful place to start. And don't throw that away. You're doing what you should be doing. You know, what's that common quote? Like, the night is darkest before the dawn. I think that's in Batman. I think that's in The Dark Knight. Um, Great movie, by the way. Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think personally, I'm starting to see that a little bit more. I have been very nihilistic in the past, but thanks to reading some of these things, and really taking them in and thinking about them, I'm starting to see what people mean when they talk about how there is a meaning to life just because there's no God. And I'm starting to see that. I think that's being able to transcend how people think you should act and actually do what you care about, do the things that you care about and do what you want to do. I think that's the most beautiful thing in the world. And so, yeah, I hope you guys liked it. And I'll post again for sure. I think I'm going to start doing this weekly because I love philosophy. I love talking about it. And there's a lot of really good stuff out there. But all right. Thanks, guys.